This is Billy Kay with a history of Scottish nationalism told from within the movement, The Cause. Programme 6, Resurrection.
When I joined the SNP, I vividly remember the first meeting I went to in the SNP. So I would be, 16 or something at the time. And there was great celebration because the poll had been published that day and we'd gone into double figures for the first time in ages. I think we were at 12%. So that's the kind of context I joined in. There wasn't a Scottish Parliament. SNP support was derisory. So the idea that we would ever end up in the position we're in just now really... I would have wanted to believe it. And I suppose at a certain gut level, like all nationalists, I've always believed, and I still believe we will be an independent country. But did I think in 2014 we'd be coming within 5% of winning an independence referendum back in 1986? I think I'd be rewriting history if I said yes to that.
I interviewed you about 2.5 years ago. As long ago as that. What's happened to the SNP? What's happened to the cause since then?
Well, I suppose in a nutshell, we lost the referendum, but we might be well on our way to winning the country.
Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, present and past leaders of the Scottish National Party, on an exhilarating and turbulent period dominated by the independence referendum of 2014, which polarised people into yes and no, positive and negative. Jean Freeman and Derek Bateman.
I was genuinely shocked when I heard Scots run down our own country. I had never heard people work so hard to belittle in every way everything that I thought we as Scots, as a nation, stood for. I can see a case against independence on economic grounds and the uncertainty of the unknown. I can see that. But why anybody would try to rubbish the Scottish nation, our economy, our prospects, almost rewrite our history, to me was like an insult. And I found it quite difficult to look at the campaign in retrospect and to treat it with respect. I think it abused the Scottish people. I thought it was a baseless, unprincipled and mendacious campaign, Better Together. And whatever failings there were on the yes side, at least for me, it retained principle and intellectual honesty and optimism.
There was such enthusiasm and energy. And the thing I really loved most was when there were people there who would say things like, I've never been to a meeting like this before. I've never read those bits of the newspapers before. I just loved that. I thought, this is brilliant.
The whole period was emotionally charged, but it was a positive charge. You went to bed happy and exhausted, knowing the next day that no matter how knackered you were, you would get up and bounce again.
When I look back in the campaign, all I remember is the most energising experience of my life. And I remember one night, I think it was in Kilsyth, it was a Friday night, I think there was a football match on or something, but I'm thinking, nobody will be here. 700 people. And I just remember thinking, where else would you get this anywhere in the world? So these were the high points. Having conversations with people that were so incredibly detailed and knowledgeable. And, it was the best experience of my life.
It was a fantastic opportunity to get involved, to try and do something to see Scotland get on its feet politically. And for us ordinary folk, just to have a voice. There's a huge awareness being awakened in the Scots now. We didn't lose. One day we will see Scotland independent.
From the outset, our name was Women for Independence, Independence for Women, because we knew that even if we were part of the success of independence, that of itself would not give us the equality. So it's a feminist organisation committed to securing equality at every level of society for women and believing that independence offers us the best route.
The great thing about the Spirit of Independence, more than anything, was we had everybody in Aberdeen. So you had SNP councillors and MSPs, you had Labour for Independence, you had the Radicals out, you had every kind of group you can think of. And nobody I came across ever had any division in politics. It was a common cause.
Chris Law, whose iconic fire engine inspired people the length and breadth of Scotland, as did the artists in national collectives Yestival, the Green and Socialist parties, Commonweal, Radical Independence, and a myriad of yes groups from Asians and Poles to English for independence. Dundee and its city centre was a hive of irrepressible and often spontaneous activity, recalled by Tony Banks of Business for Scotland, Zoe Dingwall, Harry Marshall, Deb Brown and Ian Bryson.
I was the piper that led the parades through Dundee, and the crowds that came were unbelievable. It was ordinary Dundee public that were out shopping with their grannies and their granddads and their aunties and uncles. They just come in and they join in. And what a message that put across to the people.
This huge double-decker rolls up and it's emblazoned, yes, 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 everywhere, saltires. And I remember looking at that, and then in rolls Chris Law's Spirit of Independence, an old fire engine truck, and again, beautifully decked out in saltires, etc. And in rolls the Business for Scotland bus, and I remember standing there looking, and the tears were rolling, the passion and the hope for your country. It was a sight to see everything coming together, and it played a huge part.
I'll never ever forget this. The guy come over and he says to them, "You can't have that there, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do that." Just sold them 2 yes t-shirts. Absolutely fun.
Got his number and we're the best of buddies.
I was campaigning from 9 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night with 3 different teams for 4.5 months. The registrations in itself here in Dundee, I actually can proudly say I hold the record. I registered 3,300 new potential voters in 3 weeks. I stood like an octopus. I would have like 5 clipboards piled up in the morning and I'd hand them out. I was right in the floor traffic of foot traffic coming in and out of the overgate. And anybody that passed me, they wouldn't get past without me asking if they'd registered to vote.
It was for me the most significant day of the referendum campaign. I was campaigning in Dundee the 1st of September. In the centre of Dundee, I noticed a queue of folk queuing up in the sun, and I went to speak to a lad at the front of the queue, and I said, he was in his 40s probably. I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, we're queuing to get our registration forms to vote. And I said, I don't know if you just moved into the city. And he said, no, I've been here all my life. I said, how come you went off the register? And he says, I've not been registered since the poll tax. But this is the first time there's been anything worth voting for. And he said, the folk here think just the same as me, and we've got to get our forms in. And for the first time in the campaign, actually, I got tears were welling up in my eye. I thought this was one of the most important things I'd ever seen in my puff. And the next night I was at Falkirk, and I had Dennis Canavan with me. So I was saying to this meeting in Park Hotel, I said, look, yesterday in the great city of Dundee, I saw something extraordinary, something unusual, something absolutely unique. And somebody shouted out, a Tory. It brought the place down. It was the best heckle of the campaign. And I said, no, not a Tory. I saw people queuing up in the sun, exercising their democratic franchise and right to vote. I mean, even when I talk about it now, I get a choke in my throat. I mean, it is an illustration of the fundamental shift in thinking that was happening in the latter stages of the referendum campaign, and why, of course, Scotland has changed politically, in my view, for a generation.
At the time, though, any rising optimism on the yes side was always tempered by what they regarded as relentless Hodden-Doon negativity emerging out of what they called Project Fear.
The low point, I think a really decisive point, was when we were told that the pound was not Scotland. Coming to Scotland to declare that we wouldn't have access to our own currency after 300 years, I think that was the nadir. I think that said, these people will go to any depths to prevent your democracy if they think that the British elite is in some way being threatened. It seemed as well to be denying the very existence of the thing they were supporting, which was union.
When you look back and you understand that the majority of those who did vote no were either people above a certain age who were certainly fearful of the change and the impact on pensions and the whole currency question and the economic side of it, and certainly the mobilisation of the British state and the media to put the fear of death into these people had a prominent role to play.
Pensioners have been visited on their doors and phoned and told, if you vote yes, and on the polling day, if you vote yes, you'll lose your pension. And I tell you, I'm going to take that to London, because that is what makes me furious, and it makes me hell-bent on ending the time we're going to be in Westminster.
The Yes side countered with passionate grassroots activity in the community and on social media, as well as a brilliant online presence led by websites like Bella Caledonia, Newsnet and Wings Over Scotland, whose wee blue book became an indie Bible on the streets. From a Yes perspective, however, any pretence of balance from the mainstream media was thrown out the window when the polls got too close for comfort.
I remember sitting in a pub in Dundee. It was a Saturday night and the news come through about the Murray poll. The Yes campaign was in the lead, 51-49%. And you seen people starting to look at their phones and they were getting the same message that you were getting. And they were lifted and the whole pub started to cheer at this. It was unbelievable.
And something approaching half the population have a very clear view, and it's not being reflected, as it wasn't being reflected across the entire media. You have got a problem there. They appeared to become mere mouthpieces, often, for one side of the campaign.
We wanted hope over fear, but fear certainly won in the end. Had it been a fair fight, then I don't think there'd be any complaints. But it certainly wasn't a fair fight, and the establishment backed up the establishment, and the little man got silenced.
When it first started and the referendum built up, I was nervously cautious. But as it gained momentum and as it felt there was a tide of change across Scotland, and that people at work and people I knew were beginning to really think about it, and it was becoming so significant, I got caught up in it. And I tried not to, because I tried to keep myself grounded, because I've always known how disappointed we can be with the Scottish people. But my brother and I really took to the wind of change, didn't we? We went to all the events and we were there the night before in Perth. And I have to admit, I just thought we'd clinch it. And the bitter disappointment was just so horrendously heartfelt. And coupled, I might add, with Alex Salmond's resignation, was, I would say, one of the most significantly miserable events in my entire life. It felt like an historical disappointment and a Scottish historical failure. That's how I felt.
It was quite sad, because you looked at it and thought the majority of the Scottish people don't believe in themselves and believe in their country.
I'm still troubled by the idea that we probably are the only nation ever to vote no in a democratic plebiscite to our own independence. And I kind of worry about what that actually says. I mean, how the hell do you vote against your own country? What it means, of course, is if you voted no, it means that Britain's your country, primarily.
The only way I can describe that is I'd lost my history. I'd lost everything that I believed in. All of a sudden, I'm left in a position where we don't have independence, and I don't believe in the system that we used to have.
All that hope that built up over months and weeks and days before the referendum had just overnight been snatched away. Because I'd met a lot of people who came from poor backgrounds, and I could see, having talked to them over days and weeks before the referendum, their hope was being built up, and it was snatched away overnight.
I felt as if somebody had pulled away a rug.
When the result came through, did you have a good greet?
Oh, aye. I couldn't do it there and then because I was in public. I said I always believed we could win, and I did. But by the last couple of days, I was convinced we would win. Now, partly that's because I spent the last couple of days in Glasgow, and we did win in Glasgow. You know, with hindsight, my view of it was I just assumed what was happening in Glasgow was happening everywhere else. I was a bit shocked that we hadn't won, so I was devastated. And that night, I left the Glasgow count about 5 o'clock in the morning to come through to Edinburgh. I had a wee greet in the car on the way there. Got to Edinburgh, coming to see Alec, and of course Alec had decided to resign, so I had a greet again. So that whole night and day was punctuated by floods of tears.
What preceded me was watching Cameron coming sauntering out of Downing Street that morning. And instead of making the statesmanlike appeal that he could have done, he started rumbling on about English votes, English laws, contemptuously actually. And I realised to take advantage of that political opportunity, because he had opened up the door. In fact, we are where we are now, partly because of what Cameron said that morning. To open up the door, I had to get myself out the road. Otherwise, the question would be, why is he staying? You lost, you take responsibility, I believe in that. And clearing the decks for what's to come. So I went back to Butte House and I wrote my resignation speech. And I went to bed for a couple of hours. I was seeing Nicola and John, and there was a couple of people to talk to. I was just going into the room, you see, and I was stowed out. I realised that the ending wasn't quite right. It may be subconscious, because I actually heard Ted Kennedy's speech back in 1980. So maybe that's where it came from, but I thought I've got to end this contrasting a personal story with a national story. And so I ended it by saying, for me as party leader, my time is nearly over as First Minister. But for Scotland, the campaign continues, and the dream shall never die.
Many thousands of people, however, did grieve and mourn for what felt like the death of an ideal, not realising that even in the darkest hours, resurrection was stirring. One thing remained constant, though: Sheena Wellington.
On the 19th of September, we were in a hotel in Rome. We were flicking through the news channels. I was obviously feeling sorely disappointed. Every news channel across Europe was in George Square. They were all reporting that the No supporters had marched into the square and started beating up and generally causing mayhem with the Yes supporters. We looked at the British media, and they were either not reporting it, or they had Yes and No supporters have clashed in George Square, which is an entirely different way of looking at things.
I went into my office and I sat down in the dark and sobbed with a whiskey. I was absolutely devastated, and I think it was more painful when Alex resigned. But, you know, when I think about what we've achieved in the short few months since then, whether it was intentional or not, to walk away and to leave us in the hands of Nicola was an absolute masterstroke. He couldn't have a more worthy successor, and we couldn't have a better leader.
What was it like for you when you realised that you would be the next First Minister taking the cause on?
On one level, terrifying, because your party's just suffered a defeat on its defining issue. And so it was a terrifying prospect, a very exhilarating prospect as well. I was also, and still am, very conscious of the fact I was succeeding somebody who was, a legend in terms of what he'd achieved. But on the other hand, you don't get the chance to lead your party and lead your country every day, so I just decided to grasp the opportunity and do it to the best of my ability, and that's still what I do every single day.
One of my pals, Chris, he was a Yes supporter. He did a bit of Yes campaign. And the day after the referendum, he must have been one of the few people who was up and awake and had BBC News on and had David Cameron on the steps of Downing Street saying, we're not going to let Scottish MPs vote on things anymore. And Chris went straight off to the computer and he joined the SNP, the first thing he's probably ever joined in his life.
And I remember this quite vividly as well, even though I hadn't slept for God knows how many days. But on the Friday night, I remember Peter saying to me, well, there's 600 new members. And I was like, that's amazing. By the Saturday morning, it was 5,000. By the Sunday night, it was 10,000. And you're like, something is really happening here. We had that day of devastation, grating our eyes out. But then very quickly, I think everybody picked themselves up and thought, do you know what? We'll live to fight another day on this. So yeah, very early, I think I got the sense that something had totally, fundamentally changed.
So did that energise you?
Absolutely energised me. I mean, that weekend, that for me was the difference between going in a complete downer of depression and suddenly thinking, we might have lost the battle, but the war is still to be won.
It took a long time for Yes to grow and get mobilised as a big movement, and it hasn't slowed down. It seems like it's a bit like a super tanker. Once it's speeded up and got going, now it can't slow down.
Peter Lynch of Stirling University, in the words of Bob Dylan, the slow one now will later be fast, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changin'. The vitality and determination of the post-referendum surge restored hope to octogenarian editor of the Scots Independent, Jim Lynch.
The SNP conference was in Perth when Alex stood down, and when we came out, there was an absolute sea of filter, the Yes campaign. It was very moving because these folk want independence.
For people like me, it was utterly inspiring. That was 1,000 women in a church in Perth, crystal clear that they were gutted, we weren't independent, but determined that Women for Indy would keep going, and so would they.
On the Tuesday night after the referendum, we had our Next Yes meeting, and it was the busiest meeting that we'd had. The pub was rammed, easily over 100 folk there. We realised then that there was no way that we were going back in our box. There was a real sense of hope for the future.
And since then, of course, the SNP is now the biggest mass membership party in Europe relative to size. It looks like the referendum changed the nation. It changed the nation in the thing that matters most. It changed people's psychology. There's an old Welsh legend, isn't there? Graldus changed the colour of his thought by drinking from a Welsh fountain. Lots of people in Scotland changed the colour of their thought by the process of the referendum campaign.
I kind of was able to understand Robert the Bruce sitting there in that little cave saying, you know, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. And although our hearts were so battered and bruised, which they really, really were, we knew that we were going to get up and fight again. And it's back with a vengeance. That's without a shadow of a doubt. The passion's there.
During the 2015 general election campaign, I spoke to activists Neil Hanvey and Jean Muir, attending a book signing event with Alex Salmond in Fife.
I was at St Andrews earlier on today, and the students had just taken 15 members in their street stall, and we're now over 200 members of the SNP group at St Andrews University. There was 20 when I was there, and some of them were just folk I had signed up because I needed 20 to form a club. This is a great time to be alive as an SNP activist.
What do you think will happen? Are you optimistic?
Oh, very, 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 very. And I think it will happen much quicker than anyone expects. Now that the momentum has happened, and it's really exciting to see how visceral and positive it has become for people.
And I think there's something of greater value in that. I think it's the connection that Nicola's made with the voters down south, because they want a new politic as well.
I think there's a real social democratic left movement surging ahead, and I hope as a member of the SNP and as an MP I'll be reaching out to the English left as well, because they're excited about change.
Chris Law, one of 56 new SNP MPs elected to Westminster, a phenomenal result, way beyond what the party hierarchy could have hoped for. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon.
I guess my view was this could be a phenomenal result, but it might not be. Because there was always a danger, I think, in a Westminster election that we suffered what we've always suffered from, is suddenly, even if it's at the last minute, the mindset shifts and it's who's walking through the door at number 10 as opposed to who's speaking up for Scotland. So I was always worried that that would happen, but it didn't. And that in itself is a sign that Scotland has changed.
The Labour Party campaigned shoulder to shoulder, hand in glove with the Tory Party, and their platform was to run Scotland down. Scotland couldn't manage, Scotland was useless. That is the essence of their argument, and that's how they campaigned in the Tories' pockets last September. Now, my father, for the last 52 years, has been voting SNP in the strength of a conversation when a Labour canvasser said something like that to him in 1962. And the Labour Party think they're going to undo this in 6 months. Not a chance. I think this is going to be with us for a generation because something as different has happened. The queue in Dundee, people who at last think there was something worth voting for.
For me, the most remarkable legacy of these roller coaster referendum years is the simple fact that all of those who were devastated in defeat would do it all again, and undoubtedly will do it all again, because of what they experienced individually and collectively in striving for a cause they cherish and a country they love.
I really wish we could go back a year and do it all over again. Yeah. Even if we lost again, I would still do it in a second. The whole experience was phenomenal, and the people that you met and just the connections that you made really sort of...
Very positive.
Yeah, I rediscovered my sort of faith in Scottish society.
In the last 2 weeks, every time I came to Dundee City Square, you were the one that was there all the time.
Do you know what? I would do it all again tomorrow. Yeah. I will do it again, bet the bottom dollar.
What do you think's going to happen in the future?
Well, I think Scotland will be an independent nation. And I think, ironically, having lost the referendum, that we're actually going down that track. I think that there is now a much more cohesive voice in Scotland for progressive democratic change. I think that the resistance of the British state, which is always grudging and niggardly and makes life so difficult rather than doing the right thing, I think that almost guarantees that we will end up again in a straightforward confrontation, yes or no.
What's your reaction to the situation where you get rants in the English press warning of the dire consequences of the SNP having political power in Britain?
Yeah, it's really ironic, and I do like irony in politics, with the people who told you to stay now saying you have to stay but shut up and don't do anything, because that's essentially the Daily Mail message.
I firmly believe we will have another referendum within 10 years. And the reason I believe that is that the Westminster government will never be able to deliver on the vows and the promise it made to Scottish people. And I think not only have we still got the yes people believing in independence, I think a significant number of no voters will change their view.
To yes supporters, I'd say, don't give up the dream, keep the faith, be patient. We can't make Scotland independent just because we want it really, really badly. We've got to persuade that remaining 5–10% of people, and we've got to get a majority.
What is your gut instinct about what will happen?
I think Scotland will become independent. I think Scotland will become independent well within my lifetime.
Yes. A couple of years ago, when I was in to see my doctor about something or other, and he says, I've got to keep you alive to the referendum. I said, so now I'm looking for an extension.
I'll be for independence till the day I die. I've actually seen it, reading in the news, that there's people getting buried now with yes coffins.
You know, I'm 61 and I thought, oh, hell's teeth, this has to happen before I'm away. I will be so annoyed if I disappear off the planet and then Scotland becomes independent. I'll come back and haunt the country if it does that to me.
I've no doubt in my mind it will happen. But I also believe that in whatever stage of that journey we're at, Scotland should be as powerful and as influential and as prosperous and as fair as it possibly can be. And so, yeah, I want Scotland to be independent, but along the way, I want to use whatever powers we've got to make this country as good as it can be for the folk who live here.